Welcome back to QAV US Edition, Episode 2, Tony. How are you, Tony?
I'm well, thank you. About the same as I was 5 minutes ago when we were chatting on the Australian show.
Well, just, you're ruining the illusion. No one wants to know how the sausage is made, Tony.
No, okay. I'm well. Good to see you, Cam. It's been, 2 weeks?
Quickly we'll get into it because we don't have a lot of time today. I just wanted to touch on our US portfolio performance because it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked about it. Doing all right. Still all-time up around about 70% return versus the S&P 500 about 27% over the same period of time. So, again, it's doing not triple, but, 2.5 times the S&P 500. It's been a rocky time in the markets over in the US, obviously, in the last 6 or 8 weeks. And I had a story on that in the New York Times. The economy, the Fed, and the rates. Mr. Trump promised to end inflation starting on day one and declared in his inaugural address that the golden age of America begins right now. Instead, inflation has remained stubborn, and while Mr. Trump has been in office less than 2 months, economists warn that his tariffs are likely to make it worse. Measures of consumer and business confidence have plummeted, and stock prices have tumbled, attributable in large part to Mr. Trump's policies and the uncertainty they have caused. The Federal Reserve is expected to keep its key rate steady on Wednesday after a series of cuts that lowered rates by a full percentage point last year, according to a different article in the New York Times. I know you're reading the Wall Street Journal, Tony, and that's a Murdoch publication. You got the failing New York Times on one side. I don't know what Trump's term. I don't know what his relationship is with Rupert Murdoch these days. They seem to be frenemies. What's the Wall Street Journal saying about the U.S. economy? I tried to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal this week, by the way. I tried on my Mac, I tried in Safari, and it wouldn't. It said it had an offer, $2 a month for 12 months, and then $15.99 thereafter per month. I tried to subscribe to that, hit the purchase button, nothing would happen. I switched to Chrome, thinking it might be a browser thing, exactly the same pricing deal. Click, 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 wouldn't work. I thought I'll do it on my iPad. Opened up my iPad, downloaded the app, tried to subscribe in the app. It said $2 for the first 1 month, and then $60 a month thereafter.
Ooh.
That's the difference from trying to subscribe in the MacBook to the iPad. Price difference of $15.99
Wow.
or $60 a month. I didn't
I think I'm
subscribe.
$3 a month. I had an intro as well, intro offer.
Right.
Yeah, but
How
I
did you do it?
On my MacBook, my laptop, no problems.
Doesn't want to let me do it, so I gave up. So anyway, I don't know what the Wall Street Journal's saying. What's the Wall Street Journal saying about the US economy?
Oh, not too different really to what the New York Times article said. Look, I think I don't want to be sucked into this whole maelstrom of Donald Trump saying one thing and then commenting on it, and then Donald Trump saying something different. It's just that's business as usual. I think the important things are that rates have been left on hold by the Fed. Inflation might be, probably is rising, but it's not a concern, not of enough concern for the Fed to cut rates yet. So, I think there's what someone says and what someone does is important in this whole conversation. And we're talking today on Tuesday, the 25th of March, our time, which would be 24th of March, US time, and the market was up 1.8% in the US because Donald Trump, after threatening tariffs across the board coming in April, has now walked it back a little bit, saying that there will be some exemptions for some car makers, and the market, jumped on that kind of news. So, look, I know the policy settings of the US government are vitally important. I think it's going to take a little while for those policy settings to actually reveal themselves. A lot of it's negotiating, as we talked about before. I'm going to threaten you with a tariff, and I'll see what you do. And if you come and kiss the ring, or if you play ball on something else, if I can get something else out of here, then those tariffs may not go ahead.
Meanwhile, it's creating havoc on the markets.
Well, as we said before, the markets don't like uncertainty. It's as we always say, you can't predict things, and this is probably a good example of how you can't predict things because there's so much uncertainty going on. So I think you just got to look at, as we always do, the numbers and make our decisions based on that. And look, I'm going to point to an article which may have an impact on our portfolio because we have a number of shipping companies in our portfolio. So we don't necessarily look at sectors or be sector specific, but it's not unusual for our buy list to have a number of companies from the one sector pop up because that sector's, having its doldrums, but the companies in there are pretty good, so their prices are beaten down, but they will have their day in the sun when regression to the mean takes place. There was an article in our paper, not a US paper, I'm taking this from the Australian Financial Review, but chances are it was reprinted from one of the US papers anyway, as they sometimes are in our country. It was by Lisa Bartline, Carl Plume and Timothy Gardner. So I don't recognise them as being Australian journalists. Some of our listeners in the US might recognise them. It's from March 20th, but the headline reads, Trump's massive shipping fees threaten US trade, and it goes to on to outline the fact that, and I'll quote, Trump is drafting an executive order that would rely on funding from a US trade representative proposal to levy fines of up to 1.5 million US on China-made ships or vessels from fleets that also include ships made in China. Those potential port fees have limited the availability of ships needing to move agriculture, energy, mining, construction, and manufactured goods to international buyers, according to major US exporters and transportation providers. And this is kind of throwing global shipping into a bit of a tailspin at the moment. And the article goes on to say, vessel owners have already refused to provide offers for future US coal shipments due to the proposed USTR fees. Ex-Coal Energy and Resources Chief Executive Ernie Thrasher said in a letter this month to US Department of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. And that enacting and implementing those fees could cease exports of US coal within 60 days, putting a $130 billion US dollar worth of shipments at risk, Thrasher said. He said the fee structure could add up to 35% to the delivered cost of US coal, making it uncompetitive on the global market. And it goes on to list other examples of that from other industries like soybean exporters and grain shippers, LNG carriers, oil carriers, etc., etc. So, again, a case of something, whether it's a kite flying exercise or it's going to actually happen, but it's being mooted as a measure to I guess, move manufacturing of ships back to the US, because the article reports something like only 200 vessels. The current fleet of US-flagged cargo vessels is less than 200, and not all are US built. Is one of the quotes from this article. So, look, the aim of having ships manufactured in the US is a good one. Whether you need to cripple lots of economies to do it is questionable, and perhaps this is going to be watered down or, have lots of carve-outs on a case-by-case basis and won't come into being. But another example of what we're talking about, that there's a lot of sound and fury going on, and then the reactions are gauged and deals are done, and it does affect, it may affect some companies. I went through and had a look at some of the shipping companies in our buy list, and I can't remember the numbers, but I think it was only one that was down. Its share price was down since that date. Most of them are going up, so I don't know whether that means they're only operating US ships or whether it means that the market's still digesting what could happen, and it's all up in the air. But this is going to be a feature of the market dynamics going forward, as long as this administration's in power.
Well, if I look at Zim, who we talked about on our last episode, in the last month they're down quite a bit, actually, from $22 down to $15.62. Hasn't been a good month for Zim. ESEA Euroseas, on the other hand, has gone from $26.76 a month ago up to $31.15. So, bit of differential there between the two. One's down,
and
one's
same
up.
with other ones. DSX, TK Tankers are more shipping. There's quite a few of them on our buy list, and I think most of them were up. But of course, the curse of the pulled pork happened to Zim, I think. So you've got to add that back to their share price. Our US listeners won't know about that yet, but yeah, we've got to watch out for stocks which we pull apart. They can react negatively to the scrutiny.
Stealth Gas we have in our portfolio. They provide gas transportation, as you might, stealthily. Of course, their share price has gone down a little bit in the last month, but not by much, 10 cents, something like that, from $5.95 down to $5.80, 15 cents. Anyway, so yeah, interesting stuff. But of course, as long-time QAV listeners know, we read, we listen, we pay attention, but we just let the numbers really drive us. We don't get caught up in all of the froth and bubble of market news and analysis and fear-mongering, or the hype cycles, the boom cycles, the bust cycles. One of the great things about QAV is we just let the system tell us what to buy, when to buy, what to sell, when to sell, and let all of the noise, let other people worry about the noise, I guess.
Yeah, take the emotion out of it. That's right. And look, I don't want to sound overly critical of what's going on in the US. If it results in, better economies and there are longer-term gains, then sure, fine. I probably side with the market commentators who say it'd be good to have some clarity, but you can't have everything. So, because in the old days, if there was going to be a tax on Chinese ships arriving in the US, then within minutes the market would have factored that into all the pricing on all the stocks on all the shipping companies in the world. But that's not happening at the moment because there's just too much gamesmanship going on to be able to rely on that kind of ability to take new news into account and make your decisions based on that. So failing that, we can't do it, and we don't do it.
Well, I've got a question from one of our Australian listeners, Trent, but obviously he's been paying attention to our US stuff. He said, Cam, the buy list you ran on the 20th of January has only one stock that was on the previous buy list from the 29th of December, American Airlines. Do you know why they've all changed over, as that level of turnover is not something we see in the Australian QAV lists? I first suspected it might be quarterly results, but when I checked, the only stock from either list that had released Q4 results seemed to be Delta Airlines. The US buy list seemed to have around 20 stocks with a QAV score higher than 0.10, which is a lot less than we get from the Australian market. This seems a bit odd, considering a much larger universe of stocks. Any theory on why there are less? So, Trent, I went back and I looked at both the 29th of December buy list, the 20th of January buy list, and the most recent one I did, the 17th of January buy list. The 17th of January has 110 stocks on it. The 29th of December had 100 stocks on it. The 20th of January had 20 stocks on it. Let me explain to you the reason for the difference. I don't know. That's my best explanation. I think I may have filtered out some stocks on the 20th of January for some reason, but I can't remember why. I have nothing in my notes. I know I was having Excel issues. I'm still having Excel issues, so it might have been that. But the bottom line is, I don't think there's any good reason for it. I think I just stuffed something up. I needed to buy one stock. There was 20 stocks on that buy list. That was enough for me to find one. And I don't know. I don't know what I filtered out or why. I did spend like an hour trying to work it out yesterday. I couldn't work it out. I gave up. So you're right, though, to ask the question about why there were so few stocks. Something happened. I don't know what it was. If it was intentional, I probably would have said so when I published that one. I don't think I did, so it probably wasn't intentional. So my apologies. But thank you for paying attention.
There was a time, I don't know if it was the 20th of January, when we were looking at filtering stocks further down or tightening the filter on quality. I don't know if that was part of the process of that.
It might have been. I did consider that. We were taking certain F scores and Z scores
Yeah.
out and moving them around.
Yeah.
Again, I couldn't find any evidence to support that in my little analysis last night, so I don't want to say it was that, but could have been any number of factors. Trent, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't. Anyway, last week's buy list had what I think is now. It is interesting though that it wouldn't be unusual for us to have 80, 100 stocks on an Australian buy list.
Yeah.
And for the US buy list to produce the same number out of a pool of 3,500, 6,500, I think, is interesting. But we do, there's a lot of filtering that goes on. And so that's what it gets cut down to at the end of the day. Once we filter PropCaf and we filter sentiment and all the other things that we look at, that's what it comes down to. And as it turned out this week, we've got a problem with PropCaf on the US data as well, which we'll get into shortly. So I am going to do a pulled pork today on the stock that I added. I had to sell CPSS last week. It was a 3-point trendline sell. And I replaced it with a company called Cemex. Share code is CX. Probably shouldn't have, which we'll get into, and I might get rid of it. But it's a good story anyway. But before I do that, Tony, do you have any other news items you want to talk about?
No, that was the only one, was the shipping one. Thank you.
Okay. So CX, I'm going to do it with the caveat that I'll probably sell it today or tomorrow anyway, and I'll explain why. But I had so much fun doing the pulled pork on it that I'm going to do it anyway because I learned a lot and it's a great story. So, and it may be a buy in the future. But Cemex is a Mexican cement business. Now, I know nothing about cement. I didn't until I did this pulled pork. Now I know a lot about cement. And it's great. Being an historian, I learned about the history of cement. And I was, I knew a little bit about it from ancient Rome and the building of the Pantheon with concrete, et cetera. But I learned a lot more about it in terms of the modern history of cement. And it's the first Mexican company I've ever bought shares in, so that was interesting too. So I'll do a quick deep dive on this. Sorry, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, I saw you were going to do it, and I went to their website as part of my pre-show research and tried to find their annual report. But of course, it's in Mexican, it's in Spanish, so I had to give up.
You don't speak Mexican, Tony?
No.
You can change the website to Australian or to English. Sorry, probably.
I couldn't even find out where to do that because the website was in Spanish.
Little button up the top that says ES. You change the ES to EN and it's all in English. Okay. Well, there you go. So I love learning about history. I'm a big fan of concrete. I love brutalism. Are you a fan of brutalism, Tony?
Well, not really, but I, respect the fact that it's part of an architectural history. So I'm not saying we should tear it down, but I wouldn't say I was a fan. Too many of the school buildings and etc. when I was growing up were quite brutalist. I had enough of it at the time.
I'm a big fan. There's good brutalism and bad brutalism. Don't get me wrong. There's no effort brutalism, which is just a big concrete block. Then there's architectural brutalism where it's well designed and well thought through. And there's some great books. I've actually been trying to get one on eBay for years. A friend of mine who's a designer has a copy of it in her house, and whenever we go over for dinner, I just sit there like a autistic nerd and read her book on brutalist architecture. And I want to buy it, but it's like $300. I'm not paying $300 for this book. I want to get it on
She probably
sale.
trots it out. Cam's coming round for dinner tonight. Oh, I better get the brutalist book out. Otherwise, it's free will and the Christian church for 2 hours.
Yeah, she has lots of great design books that I love going through. Yeah, anywho, big fan of brutalism. All I've always wanted is a house that's just all concrete. Polished
Oh,
concrete floors, concrete
yeah.
walls, smooth, clean lines, cool. I think that's what I love most about the concrete is just growing up in subtropical Queensland, just the coolness, putting your face up against concrete. Ah, so good. The cool. I love the cool. It's like cheap marble. It's cheap marble with its
Hmm.
coolness. Now, for people like me who don't know the difference between cement and concrete, because I needed to look this up again, cement is an ingredient of concrete. It's like the flour in bread. Chrissy
Mm.
bought me a flour tin. Don't know if you saw this in my light update yesterday, but when she was at Bribey Island for the school camp last week, she went to a Vinnie's and she got this beautiful mid 20th century uh, Swedish loaf tin, ceramic loaf tin, beautiful condition, mint condition. So I made my first loaf of sourdough in that yesterday. It was lovely. Anyway, cement is like the flour in concrete. You mix it with other stuff. It's a powder, and you mix it with other stuff: gravel, sand, rocks, and then water to make concrete. So the cement is basically the glue, and the concrete is the glue plus the rocks plus the sand plus the water, all of the solid stuff that you build with. So we'll be talking a lot about how cement is made over the course of this deep dive because it's fascinating and I knew nothing about it until this morning. Cemex, though, is Cemex SABDCV, a Mexican, this is according to Wikipedia, a Mexican multinational building materials company headquartered in San Pedro near Monterrey in Mexico. It manufactures and distributes cement, ready-mix concrete, and aggregates in more than 50 countries. In 2020, it was ranked as the fifth largest cement company by the amount of cement produced annually in the world at 87 million tons of cement. That is a lot of cement. Now, SAB.CV, Tony, do you know what that stands for?
I think it means it's a listed Mexican company.
Very good, Tony. Check out the big brain on Brett. Sociedad Anónime Bursátil de Capital Variable, or variable, but variable, I think is how it's pronounced in Spanish. Sociedad Anónime basically means it's a Mexican equivalent of a publicly limited company, like a limited or an Inc. corporation with shareholders. Bursátil means it's publicly traded on the stock market. And capital variable means variable capital, basically. Allows it flexibility to increase or decrease its capital structure without extensive bureaucratic hassle or formal restructuring. In everyday terms, it means we're a Mexican corporation, our shares trade publicly, and we can easily adjust our capital structure without jumping through too many legal hoops. According to Stockopedia, Cemex is a Mexico-based operating and holding company primarily engaged directly or indirectly through subsidiaries in the production, distribution, marketing, and sale of cement, ready-mix concrete, aggregates, clinker, and other globally provided construction materials. I said before it's in 50 countries. It includes Mexico, the United States, Europe, South America, Central America, Caribbean, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Has cement production facilities in Mexico, the United States, Spain, Egypt, Germany, Colombia, Poland, Dominican Republic, United Kingdom, Panama, Puerto Rico, Thailand, and Nicaragua. Used to have some in Australia, but they sold them off when they needed some cash, which I'll talk about. So as soon as you go to the website and figure out how to convert it into English, the first thing you'll see is that they are recognized as one of the world's most ethical companies. In March of 2025, 2 weeks ago, they received the world's most ethical companies recognition from Ethisphere, a global leader in defining and advancing the standards of ethical business practices. They were recognized for exemplary business integrity, ethics, compliance, and governance standards. So I thought that was interesting. Yes, the red-headed child up the back, you had a question?
Does making cement contribute to global warming?
It turns out it does. And I did not know that until I kept reading. According to the Global Cement
and Concrete
Association...
But when they hand out the ethical awards, they don't worry about global warming.
Well, when I finish the story, you'll understand why.
Sorry.
The cement industry is the source of about 5 to 8% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. And this is on their website. This is on Cemex's website. We also know that our end product, ready-mix concrete, is the most used man-made material in the world and plays an essential role in society's development and growth. This sets the stage for us to contribute to climate change mitigation by reducing CO2 emissions in our production processes, as well as the entire life cycle of our products. And they've done a lot of work around this, according to their press materials. And I didn't realize cement was so bad. So, as I said earlier, I don't know much about stuff. I know a lot about a couple of things. Everything else, I'm kind of ignorant. Chrissy said, "You're not a man who works with his hands." I said, "Well, I type on a keyboard. Technically, that is my hands. Outside of that, I don't know much about how the world works. History, politics, a little bit. Outside of that, not so much." So, for people like me, and I'm sure most people who listen to this are either manly men who know more than things about me, or women who are just as smart, who know more about how the world works than I do. Making concrete, it turns out, is a dirty, fiery chemical process that takes a lot of energy. A lot of energy. To make cement, you have to heat limestone, calcium carbonate, at insanely high temperatures, 14 to 1500 degrees Celsius. You do that so it decomposes into calcium oxide and carbon dioxide, bad for the atmosphere. It's a chemical process known as calcination. Calcination is fundamental to making cement, and that process is responsible for about 60% of its total emissions. All of the carbon dioxide that gets released during the calcination process. Then, to achieve the temperatures in the kilns, you have to burn coal or petroleum or natural gas. That's another 30 to 40% of the total emissions, is that process. And then on top of that, you've got the grinding and the crushing and the transportation, which consume a lot of electricity and fuel. So overall, making concrete is a huge carbon emissions trap. So Cemex has a brand called Vertua, V-E-R-T-U-A, which is marketed as a more sustainable way of producing cement and concrete. It's a whole life cycle thing, using the ground up stuff from buildings they pulled down into rebuilding other things, recycling it, etc., etc. They claim that their processes can reduce carbon emissions by over 30%, whilst maintaining the strength and durability of the product. I read a story just last month or so, came out from their British operation. They're partnering with HiiROC, H-I-I-R-O-C, a British hydrogen company, to use carbon neutral hydrogen using HiiROC's proprietary thermal plasma electrolysis process, which requires just 1/5 of the electrical energy used in water electrolysis and captures carbon as a solid byproduct, avoiding CO2 emissions. So they're doing lots of stuff like that to try and reduce the carbon footprint of making cement.
Fantastic.
Anywho, the company started in 1906 with the founding of a business called Cementos Hidalgo in 1931, and merged with another company, Cementos Portland Monterrey, based in Monterrey. The combined entity became Cementos Mexicanos, or Cemex, went public on the Mexican Stock Exchange in 1976, at which point they were the largest cement producer in Mexico. Then they started acquiring companies, Mexican companies, in the 80s, ended up as one of the 10th largest cement companies in the world. And then they started buying companies all over the globe. They've had a few issues along the way. In 2006, they announced that they were buying Rinker Group in the United States for $14 billion US. The United States Department of Justice brought an antitrust lawsuit against Cemex and blocked the acquisition and forced them to sell off about 40 cement and concrete plants that were part of the deal. In the mid-1990s, they bought Venezuela's largest cement company, Vencemos. But then in 2008, Hugo Chavez nationalized the whole cement industry in Venezuela, claiming the industry was exporting its products because they could get higher prices exporting it. And there was sort of capped pricing in Venezuela. It was causing industries for Venezuelan construction, domestic construction. So he nationalized all of their businesses. He did pay them for it. They got $600 million US in compensation and the cancellation of $154 million in debt. Then the GFC happened also in 2008. They apparently were highly leveraged at the time. They had a lot of issues with debt. They sold off their Australian holdings in 2009 to a Swedish group, Holcim. And, you know, anyway, they've had some issues along the way. But talking about their ethics award, last year in August 2003, the US National Labour Relations Board, the NLRB, concluded that Cemex had engaged in over 20 unfair labour practices during a 2019 union election involving the Teamsters. These violations included threatening, surveilling, and interrogating employees, as well as hiring security guards to intimidate workers. The NLRB used this case to set a new policy that an employer who interferes with a union election will be compelled to recognise the union without an election. A national-wide policy that was put in place as a result of this. So
how much does it cost to buy one of these ethical awards, Cam?
Tony, more than you and I have. Well, more than I have. Maybe you could buy it. Maybe you should buy one for QAV. World's most ethical value investing podcast. No, they've had some ethical issues.
But they're good marketers, and they market the hell out of their worst thing. Yep.
And props to whoever it was in their PR team that said, you know what we need? We need one of these world's most ethical companies awards. That's what we need. That'll fix all of our problems.
Yeah.
You know, when I think cement companies, I usually don't think ethical. Maybe I watched The Sopranos too many times, and I lived in Melbourne for too long, when, you know, too many bodies of enemies of construction companies were turning up in the foundations of Melbourne buildings and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm not passing judgment. The company was run for many years by Lorenzo Zambrano. His grandfather, also Lorenzo Zambrano, founded the Cementos Portland Monterrey company in 1920. But Lorenzo, the junior, died 10 or 11 years ago. Interestingly, though, because I've been doing some stuff on war profiteering in my other podcasts recently, Monterrey had been destroyed during the Mexican Revolution in 1910 and was being rebuilt in 1920, and so the company that the grandfather founded played a large role in the rebuilding of Monterrey, profiting, I guess, from the rebuilding of the company after the Mexican Revolution. I want to talk a little bit about the history of cement, though, because this is the most fascinating part for me. Portland cement is the most common type of cement in general use around the world. Look at you nodding there like you're an ex-brickie or something. Yeah, like what?
I've heard of Portland cement.
It's the basic ingredient of concrete, mortar, stucco, and some kinds of grout. It was developed from other types of hydraulic lime in England in the early 19th century by a guy called Joseph Aspdin. He obtained a patent for it in 1824 and he named it Portland cement. Why, Tony? I should point out to new listeners that Tony won several trivia contests in Australia back in the day, so the way he's nodding sagely there should not be a surprise because Tony knows lots of stuff about lots of stuff.
I don't know why it's named Portland cement, but I'm guessing it happened in Portland.
For $50,000, Tony.
It happened in Portland. He discovered it in Portland.
Portland where?
Where he lived.
Oregon?
No, UK. Portland,
the
UK.
most famous kind, or the most prized kind of stone for British architecture for centuries was Portland stone. It was used in St. Paul's Cathedral, the British Museum, hard, shiny, beautiful-looking stone. And he believed that Portland cement, when it hardened, looked like Portland stone. So it was a cheaper alternative to Portland stone. You could, mix it up yourself rather than having it quarried, I guess. His son, William Stone, was the creator of this. His son, Joseph, who I mentioned before, was the inventor of modern Portland cement. In the 1840s, he created a mix with higher limestone content, burned at a higher temperature, and increased wear and tear in the grinding process, which made it stronger, harder. It was a bit like the $6 million man of cement. We can harder, stronger, faster. It's for people who were around in the 70s. Get that reference? We have the technology to build him harder, stronger, faster. Now, cement can be traced back to ancient times. There are actually naturally occurring deposits of cement that are 12 million years old that were found where there was an occurrence of oil shale right next to a bed of limestone that had been set on fire through natural occurrences and it created cement. But chemically, cement is a product that includes lime as the primary binding ingredient. Back in ancient times, the Babylonians and the Assyrians used bitumen or pitch to bind stuff together, alabaster slabs and things like that. Then the ancient Egyptians used burnt gypsum, the basic foundation of chalk or plaster of Paris. The ancient Romans used a lot of cement and concrete, though. Things like the Pantheon I mentioned before, or the Trajan baths were built with cement and concrete, still standing today. The Pantheon, my favorite building in Rome, I went there when we went on our trip to Rome, took my mother there. It was her first trip to Rome. It's just something marvelous. Now, Pantheon geeks will know, of course, that the original Pantheon is not the one standing today. It was built by Agrippa, the best friend anyone ever had, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, Octavian Augustus's best friend, without whom Augustus probably wouldn't have survived the first couple of years. Agrippa was his go-to get shit done guy, won all of his battles, helmed his fleets, then ran Rome for him until he died, sadly. He built the original Pantheon, but it burnt down and was rebuilt by Hadrian, probably dedicated around 126 CE, and rebuilt in concrete, and it still stands to this very day, largely because the Christians took it over and turned it into a church. But anyway, it's an amazing, impressive building. Still has the largest unreinforced concrete dome anywhere in the world, built in 126 CE. And the interesting thing about Roman concrete, one of the interesting things is its more sustainable than modern concrete because they couldn't burn it at those sorts of temperatures. But it was made with about 85% volcanic ash. So they didn't need to burn their own limestone. They just went and dug it up out of volcanoes and used that. And it had a lot of volcanic ash and volcanic rock in it too. And there's been lots of studies I've seen in the last decade or so that says that it is able to hold up under earthquakes a lot more because of the rock component. When they've done, I don't know, whatever sound wave scans of it, some sort of sound wave X-rays, sonic X-rays, they can see all these chunky rocks in it that give it some sort of extra stability than the modern concrete has, apparently. So modern developments of concrete, cement and concrete, started after the Industrial Revolution. And it was driven by three main needs: hydraulic render, hydraulic mortar, and just stronger concrete in general. Now, again, being an idiot, I think of hydraulic as being pumps or things driven by water power. I didn't realize that hydraulic also applied to concrete. And when you apply it to concrete, it's about the application of water in the process. Something else I didn't really understand is that concrete doesn't dry, it hardens. Big difference. And it requires water. So when you mix water with the cement and the other ingredients that you put in, it actually, there's a chemical reaction. The calcium silicates and the aluminates that are in the limestone after it's been broken down react with the water and create crystallized structures, hard, stable, crystalline structures that require water and can even be created underwater. I know the Romans used it to build port facilities. There's underwater concrete off the coast of Italy that has survived. So you can actually build concrete underwater and it will harden as it would on land because water is a part of the process. So fascinating for me. Everyone else is probably rolling their eyes going, "You're such an idiot. We already knew this. We've known this since we were kids." Well, screw you. I learned something today and I'm not ashamed of that.
Well done. That was interesting.
By the way, have I told you that Chrissy's decided I'm autistic?
Is that why she keeps putting the brutalist architecture book in front of you?
Mm. Yeah. Apparently I'm autistic, she's decided. So, CX by the numbers. Now, this is where we have to flag the fact that we think the numbers are bad.
Yeah.
So one of the key, long-term listeners will know, new listeners may not have picked this up yet, one of the key things that we look at is price to operating cash flow. And when I was buying this for our portfolio last week and I ran the buy list, I did see that its price to operating cash flow out of Stockopedia was insanely low, 0.01, which basically means it would take several days for the company to generate enough cash flow per share to pay for the price per share, which did surprise. I looked at it and I went, whoa, that looks weird. And then I had a look at its F score and some other things in Stockopedia, and they looked healthy and it looked like it was doing okay. I looked at its operating cash flow. It was doing $1.5 billion of operating cash flow, 1.8, I think. I was like, it's making money. I didn't think any more about it. Then I get an email from Tony this morning going, hold on, its PropCAF is actually 14. I was like, what? No. And then I did the numbers, and surprisingly, long-time listeners will be surprised by this, Tony was right and I was wrong. That's never happened before. So, Stockopedia have got a problem with their PropCAF number here. And now the question is, how many other stocks in my buy list have that problem? First thing I'm going to do when I get a chance tonight is to run some analysis on their PropCAF numbers. Because when you do the PropCAF manually, you look at their operating cash per share and you look at the share price, yes, it comes out as 14, not 0.01. Having said that, their market cap's around 26 million, which is it? Oh, again, it says, oh yeah, million USD. No, hold on, 26.2 million USD. It says here.
For the market cap of a big company like Cemex.
I know, right? Why does it say million? It should be billion. It should be 26 billion. Average daily trade is 61.7 million. So
that the whole company gets traded 3 times every day.
3 times every day, yeah.
They put it in the cement mixer, it goes round and round.
I don't know. I don't know if I can trust these numbers. Anywho, in terms of our scoring, leaving outside the prop calf for a second, quality rank on Stockopedia is 63. The F score is pretty good. It was, let me see, what was the F score? 7. Pretty good for an F score. I score, again, leaving aside the prop calf stuff, it scored well for us on F score. The price is higher than TK IV number 1, which is $1 IV1. Our IV2 though is $6.50. It's lower than our IV number 2, so I scored it for that. Its price was less than book plus 30, had an uptrend. It had prices less than book as well, of course, as well as prices less than book plus 30. Growth over PE was greater than 1.5, so we couldn't score it for that. Yield was greater than bank debt. Yield was less than bank debt, so I couldn't score it for that. I did score it for prop calf, of course, which turns out to be a problem. So anyway, it ended up with a quality score of 64% and a really good QAV score, but on second thoughts with the prop calf, it probably, wouldn't have got up there, so it shouldn't be on there. Also, one thing I didn't do last week and I did do this morning was track down a commodity price for cement. Because it's not one of our normal commodities that we look at, because we don't have a lot of big cement companies on our buy list in Australia. I did find a commodity price, and in fact, cement is in a sell. So it's... Again, if I'd known that last week, I wouldn't have bought it. So with that, I'm probably going to sell it, I think, and get out and replace it with something else. Tony?
I think it's worthwhile asking Stockopedia to explain the operating cash flow discrepancy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't disagree with you. The only question I had on what you just said was I thought the forecast earnings per share growth was reasonably high. Just try and look it up now. Anyway, that's a minor thing.
I've got a no for greater than twice the price. Forecast earnings per share for 1 year is 0.67. That is high.
So 67% forecast.
Yeah.
I mean, if you put that over the PE, which is about 7, it's going to look pretty good. Anyway, check that one.
Yeah, I will. Anywho, we have lost a little bit of money on it. Like, it's down 2 or 3% since I added it. I bought it at $6.07. It's down to $5.91. I think I'm going to cut my losses on it though. Now that I have more information, or I've actually paid more attention to the information, let's put it that way, than I did last week.
Actually, you're not going to lose much because Stockopedia is saying it last traded at $6.06.
Really? That's not what my spreadsheet says. My spreadsheet's really, my stock history is really not wanting to update today. All of my prices will go, all right. Well, so there you go. I will dump that. I'll get out of it neutral, and I will figure out something else to replace it with, and I will double check the prop calf before I do that.
Good.
Well, that's it. That's all I've got. But I hope somebody out there learned something about cement and concrete and enjoyed that. Just in case you're in a trivia contest and somebody asks you about
and most
the difference
importantly about
between cement
ethical
and concrete.
awards.
Yes, and how ethical awards work.
Yep, terrific. Good.
All right. Thank you, TK.
Thanks,
Have a good
Cam.
week. Talk to you next
too.
time.
Bye.
All right.
Spot on. Good timing.